Здравствуйте, уважаемые друзья! Вечер, за бортом у нас сейчас плюс 10 градусов, то идет, то не идет дождь. И я сейчас, как обычно, еду по дороге домой и слушаю обсуждение выборов, которые сейчас проходят в США. На самом деле очень интересно, и хотела вам поставить, чтобы вы послушали английский, да, кто любит английский послушать, потому что говорят, что слишком много французского у меня, если мы говорим про такие прямые включения по радио. И, что самое интересное, что я хотел бы, чтобы вы послушали просто сам тон, сама атмосфера, в которой вообще обсуждаются выборы. Ладно, я не буду комментировать, вы слушайте сами.
Forced to weigh in on. And Howard Weiss-Tisman is in southern Vermont watching two Act 46 merger votes, races in Bennington and Windham counties, and other local contests.
In southern Vermont, we're watching a few races over in Bennington County, including the election for the seat formerly held by Kaya Morris, who resigned earlier this year. There were also spirited campaigns in Bennington for sheriff and the state's attorney, and we'll get you those results when they're available. There's a race in the Windham County towns of Vernon and Guilford, where Democrat Sarah Coffey could claim a seat long held by Republicans. If Coffey wins, it could mean the Democrats are that much closer to securing a veto-proof majority in the House. And we've also got our eyes on two Act 46 merger votes. One's in Barry and Barry City, and the second is among 6 Northeast Kingdom towns in Orleans County. So we'll have all that and more. I'm Howard Weiss-Tisman in Brattleboro.
Yeah, all that and more. We are talking about all of these results tonight, and you're going to be hearing those voices throughout the evening. We'll be on the air with local results at least until 11 p.m., longer if necessary. And we're going to be following NPR results as soon as NPR's special election coverage starts at 8 p.m. And we'd love to hear what you think, what you've been looking at today. Tell us what you've been seeing. I was at my polling place in Moncton in Addison County at about 7:45 a.m., and the town clerk told me it was the busiest morning she'd ever seen, and 10% of registered voters had voted by 8 a.m. So what was it like when you went to the polls? Was it more crowded than usual? Do you think that is standing up throughout the day? Call with your observations or tell us what you're looking for tonight. What race means the most to you, local or national? Call 1-800-639-2211. That's 1-800-639-2211. Or post a note on the Vermont Edition page at by Ellen Anderson. She's an associate professor of political science at UVM, where she teaches courses in constitutional law, the politics of sexuality, and American politics. Professor Anderson, thank you very much for being here tonight instead of, on the couch in your sweatpants or something.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I was going to be staring at the computer screens all night anyway, and it's a pleasure to do it in your company.
And Professor, what do you think? What will you be looking for tonight with the Vermont races? What kind of factors will you be considering?
Well, I have to say I'm not really expecting any upsets tonight. I think that if the Hallquist campaign has a shot at winning, we're going to need to see some very large positive results for her in Chittenden County and Burlington in particular. So I'm going to be looking at higher turnout rates, which we're going to see across the state, but I want to see particularly high turnout rates.
Sounds like that's what her camp is looking for, too. We heard Pete Hirschfeld saying that, that her camp was saying we've got to get people to turn out, and that's the only way we're going to be able to win.
That's exactly right. Governor Scott is a generally well-liked governor, right? So even Democrats who aren't intending to vote for him, say they're not intending to vote for him, generally think he's doing a reasonable job. He's not. A lot of politics nowadays is being driven by what we call negative partisanship. So I'm going out to vote because I hate the other guy. And Phil Scott is not hated.
Yeah, Vermont seems to be a different kind of place than a lot of the country in some ways.
And we see a lot of ticket splitting in Vermont. So there are going to be a large number of people who vote for Bernie Sanders and Peter Walsh at the top of the ticket and then turn around and vote for Phil Scott.
Well, that's correct. And part of that is that in the northeastern states, we still have more overlap between our parties than in many other places. So the severe partisan shifts that have dominated so many other states have sort of left us sort of blissfully free, not quite the right word. I do think that having three parties in Vermont helps this too. right? So a lot of people are used to not voting straight line. A lot of Democrats will pick some progressive candidates. Progressive candidates will sometimes join forces with Republican candidates. I mean, three parties do interesting things to people's sense of how they want to array their voting choices.
Ellen Anderson, stay with us. We can go to Rick here, who's calling in from Walcott. Hi, Rick. What are you observing?
Hey, Jane, I just wanted to call in and mention that I was the 684th, the final voter in the town of Wolcott, and I looked it up, and the population of Wolcott as of 2017 was 1,690. That's about 35% turnout in Wolcott. I just thought it was funny that I was the last 684th voter.
Well, and Rick, you may have your numbers right on terms of number of people in Wolcott, but that's not the same as registered voters. So it sounds like the turnout could be significantly higher depending on how many people are actually registered to vote. Or, maybe you got a lot of 15-year-olds and they're not voting. Sierra is on the line with us from Brattleboro. What about you, Sierra?
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to share that I work in a CSA shop on a farm down here on our tri-state border with New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And I didn't get a chance to look at any results of the day because I was in the shop, but I had all of these members coming in, sharing scenes from their polling stations, recounting lines and crowds and excitement, and everyone feeling like it was perhaps a record-breaking year. So I want to share that from our tri-state area, that it really feels like something's happening, and it's fantastic.
Well, Sierra, thank you for sharing that. Melody Bodette in Middlebury tweeted today that Middlebury had opened an extra line for checking in. So even though they were experiencing higher volume, there wasn't actually a longer wait. And so, that's one of the ways that some polling places have been trying to accommodate these bigger crowds. Outside of Vermont, there are important congressional races happening too, of course. I mean, we all love Vermont, but lots going on around the country, as well as races for governor and state-level ballot measures that will likely shape New England for many years. Earlier today, I spoke with John Dankosky. He's executive editor of the New England News Collaborative, and we spoke before the polls closed to get a sense of what races he's watching tonight. We started with what to follow in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts has a few interesting races, not necessarily close races at the top. Elizabeth Warren, the very popular national senator there, is expected to easily be reelected, and Charlie Baker, the Republican, very popular governor, is expected to very easily be reelected as well. What is interesting, I think, between those two races, Jane, is that we'll see a lot of ticket splitting. People who are voting for Elizabeth Warren, but Democrats who are loving Charlie Baker. He has an almost 70% approval rating in the state, and he's been one of the most popular national Republicans for quite some time. So there are those races, but I'll tell you, there's another congressional race that's actually one of the most fascinating in all of the country. It's this woman, Ayanna Pressley, who is a Boston City Council person, will be the first African-American woman to represent the state in Congress because she's running tonight unopposed. So she's going to be the first black woman in Congress from Massachusetts and from all of New England. I'll tell you more about another race that's coming up in Connecticut that may also rival that coming up in a minute.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, Vermonters will be very familiar with that idea of ticket splitting. You mentioned Charlie Baker, a popular Republican governor in what's otherwise known as a pretty blue state in Massachusetts. So not a lot of that sort of top of the ticket questions about what's likely to happen this evening. But the Ayanna Pressley race, really interesting to see the demographics shifting.
That's really interesting. She also represents, after tonight, the only majority-minority district in the state. And so that does say something about some of the shifting politics and also the shifting demographics of the state. The other thing that we're watching in Massachusetts, Jane, very closely is this ballot question number one. Now, there are three ballot questions. All are very important to people, but all the money's been going into this question one, and it has to do with nurse staffing levels. It basically says there needs to be a certain number of nurses per patient at hospitals and other healthcare facilities around the state. Many people who oppose this measure are worried it's going to cost the state millions upon millions of dollars, and a lot of nurses have come out in a WBUR poll and said we're voting against it because they worry their small hospital may close because of these new regulations. And so a lot of outside money's come into that, and it's a very close question right now. Most recent polling suggests it might go down to defeat.
Well, what prompted that question to be on the ballot then?
What prompted the question is a lot of concern from within the medical community that there just aren't enough nurses to take care of patients at the many hospitals around Massachusetts. Now, the big city hospitals that are very well staffed and already have more nurses per patient as far as a ratio than would be expected. They're wondering why they would have to comply with some sort of a state law that they've already been in compliance with for years. A lot of the state hospitals that are much smaller, they've been the concern amongst people, and that's why people on both sides of the issue are flooding in money to try to impose their will on this ballot question.
John, let's move north to New Hampshire. What races in New Hampshire are particularly interesting?
Well, New Hampshire has a few interesting races. Of course, like you in Vermont, you turn around and vote for a governor again really fast, and Chris Sununu, the Republican there, is actually running in a really, really close race. Molly Kelly is a former state senator. There are only a few polls that have been done so far, surprisingly, in New Hampshire in the governor's race. And she's either neck and neck with the incumbent, Chris Sununu, or she's trailing by 8 points. And so that's one that we're going to be watching. And of course, the first congressional district race has some fascinating storylines. Chris Pappas is a Democrat. Eddie Edwards is a Republican. Right now, it's leaning, most analysts say, toward the Democrat Pappas. If he is elected, he'd be the first openly gay member of Congress from New Hampshire. If Eddie Edwards pulls an upset, he would be the state's first African-American member of Congress. So that provides all sorts of drama. Again, a lot of money going into that because that's often been seen, the first congressional district in New Hampshire, as a swing district.
So let's keep going east. We'll cross the border into Maine. Races in Maine.
So the races in Maine are fascinating in large part because there's the specter of Paul LePage leaving the governor's office.
He has to, right? He's term limited.
Well, he has to. I think a lot of people in Maine have been waiting for him to leave for quite some time. He is right now a very unpopular governor, but he has at times been a very combative governor with the press, with Democrats, with other Republicans. He's famously said that he was Donald Trump before Donald Trump was Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And he is term limited out. And so the two people who are fighting for his job are Sean Moody, who's a Republican businessman who basically says, Paul LePage is a great governor. Let's keep it going. Let's bring jobs back to Maine. Let's bring more Mainers back home. And he's up against Janet Mills, who's a Democrat, who's the state attorney general, who's been the biggest thorn in Paul LePage's side, fighting with him over Trump administration rules, fighting with him over various questions coming out of his office. And so the idea that Janet Mills gets a chance to directly follow someone who has been one of her arch nemesis is kind of an interesting story. She leads in most polls by a pretty healthy margin right now over Sean Moody.
Now, you haven't mentioned Susan Collins. John, why not?
We haven't mentioned Susan Collins because Susan Collins isn't up for election.
I know, but you'd never know that from all the conversation about Susan Collins and whether she'll be able to get reelected.
You know, what's interesting is Susan Collins, though, I think sort of has this outsized role outside of Maine. She's a Maine politician, and they all know her as Susan Collins, who represents them, of course, because she seems to have this outsized importance. She does speak to something sort of interesting, though, about the state and where it's headed. Maine's second congressional district, of course, famously now went for Donald Trump. It was the only electoral college vote out of the Northeast for Donald Trump. Bruce Polkwin, who represents that district, is a Republican. He's up against Jared Golden. And surprisingly, this race is too close to call. Golden is a military veteran who serves in the state house. And it's showing a little bit, Jane, about what Maine is as this centrist place with deep red pockets and deep blue pockets. I think that they overwhelmingly want people like independent Angus King or independent-minded Susan Collins, the people who are too extreme on one end or the other. Paul LePage, this isn't necessarily the election for them. I also say that there's a couple of things happening because of what Mainers have done in the past that are kind of interesting. You know, they've got ranked choice voting for the first time on the Maine ballot, but it's not on the whole ballot. You'd think that it would be for the governor's race and for all of the statewide offices, but in actuality, they kind of couldn't get it together to do it for those races. So ranked choice voting is happening for the congressional and Senate races. So we're really going to find out tomorrow what this turned into and how ranked choice voting worked in the state of Maine.
And I think this is the first time that ranked choice voting has been used in any statewide election, right?
Yeah, and I think that what's going to happen is it's going to be a little bit of a referendum on this idea that if you choose a first candidate and then a second candidate, that it will help to mitigate some of the issues that that sometimes come up when people really care about a third-party candidate. In this governor's race, for instance, there is a third-party candidate who may take just enough votes away from Janet Mills to maybe cause this to be a very close vote. If there was ranked choice voting, somebody could say, I'll choose a Democrat, and then I'll choose an independent and not choose a Republican, and they could vote their conscience and things would turn out a little bit more in the Democrats' favor. So we're going to see how this actually plays out, a little experiment happening in Maine this year.
And you mentioned independent Senator Angus King, and he is expected to win re-election this evening.
Rather handily, as a matter of fact, yeah.
So no value judgment here, but let's move very swiftly through Connecticut and Rhode Island. What's happening in Connecticut, your state, your home state?
Yeah, so my home state of Connecticut is interesting because there's a governor's race in which 3 businessmen are running against each other to take over for Dan Malloy, who, like Paul LePage, is a very unpopular outgoing governor. Unpopular for a different reason. Dan Malloy just didn't do a very good job with the economy here, according to a lot of his critics. He's leaving with a big budget deficit. He raised taxes and also got concessions from state workers, but yet didn't fill a gigantic budget deficit. So whoever gets this job, the Republican, Bob Stefanowski, the Democrat, Ned Lamont, or the independent Oz Griebel, whoever gets that job is going to have a gigantic task ahead of them. There is another interesting race, though, I want to say in Connecticut. I mentioned Ayanna Pressley. When she wins tonight unopposed in Massachusetts, she'll become the first African-American female from the entire region of New England to be voted into Congress. But she's going to have company because Johanna Hayes, a former National Teacher of the Year, who is running in Connecticut's 5th district, she is very likely to win a seat as well. So we're going to go from having no black women ever in Congress in New England to having 2 in one evening.
John Dankosky is executive editor of the New England News Collaborative and the host of Next. It's a weekly program about New England that airs on VPR Sundays at noon and Thursdays at 9 p.m. And we'll talk about some of those results tomorrow on Vermont Edition with John Dankosky.
В общем, друзья мои, я просто хотел обратить внимание, помимо того, что вы все послушали североамериканский, английский, характерный для Новой Англии акцент. Просто помимо этого хотел обратить внимание на пару деталей. Во-первых, тон. Очень спокойно, без надрыва, без патетики какой-то. Во-вторых, я очень обращаю внимание на то, о чем они говорят. То есть, о чем говорят депутаты, точнее, не депутаты, в данном случае мы говорим о выборах в Конгресс и выборов сенаторов и выборы в губернаторы штатов. Так вот, они говорят о своих локальных делах. То есть они не занимаются тем, что они обсуждают глобальную политику, давайте, не знаю, там, объявим кому-нибудь войну или я не знаю что. Они просто говорят, мы хотим обеспечить, не знаю, там, новые рабочие места. Мы хотим там поднять зарплату тем-то, опустить зарплату тем-то. Мы хотим там изменений в этом-то, в этом-то. То есть конкретные шаги, которые имеют отношение к конкретной локальной области, то, что интересует конкретных локальных жителей, а не о чем-то глобальных. В этом самое главное отличие, вот как я наблюдаю вообще выборов здесь, в Северной Америке, что в Канаде, что в США, это самое главное отличие в выборах и в риторике, которая происходит вокруг этих выборов, по сравнению с тем, что мы наблюдаем в странах бывшего СССР, где больше внимания уделяется каким-то там либо делам столичным, связанным с высокой там политикой государственной, либо какие-то сюжеты, связанные с повесткой вообще международной, да. То есть чисто локальные дела в канадских, американских выборах, они находятся на 1-м, на 2-м, на 3-м месте, в то время как дела, связанные со столицей, с международной политикой, это темы, которые вообще там приоритетом 10-го порядка. Никто не обсуждает близость к президенту. Обратили внимание, да, что слово президент, Трамп, там еще что-то не возникает. То есть не говорится о том, что вот из-за того, что там мистер Смит, условно говоря, супер кореш там Дональда Трампа, соответственно, весь народ должен бежать его поддерживать. Следующий момент, это момент, связанный с, опять же, с поддержкой, да, если говорится о политической точке зрения там какого-то там оппонента, то говорится о том, какой партии он принадлежит, да, кандидата какой партии. То есть вы не раз слышали, что они говорят, что либо он демократ, либо республиканец, либо он вообще независимый. И на самом деле, кстати, в этом тоже есть изюминка, что, обратите внимание, делали обзор по-моему, по 4 в сумме штатов, и там не раз звучало, что были кандидаты независимые, которые не принадлежат ни к одной из правящих партий, да, то есть я имею в виду не к демократам, ни к республиканцам. И последний момент, на который хотел обратить внимание, это то, что в американском обществе происходит определенный сдвиг, потому что вы слышали, что в одном месте избирается впервые в истории открытый гомосексуалист, в другом месте впервые выбирается чернокожая, мало того, что чернокожая, так она еще женщина. Для довольно-таки консервативных североамериканских штатов это большой сдвиг вперед. Да. Люди спокойно говорят об этом, люди в какой-то мере, мне показалось, даже с какой-то гордостью, да, что в нашем обществе, на наших глазах происходят какие-то исторические изменения. И еще раз говорю, это происходит в контексте обсуждения локальных дел, что там в Вашингтоне никого по большому счету не волнует, кто там Трамп за Трамп, против Трампа и так далее не волнует. Людей волнует, что происходит конкретно у них дома. Именно это является главным стержневым элементом вообще во всей избирательной кампании в Штатах и в Канаде. То, что происходит у нас дома, а не где-то там на расстоянии 1000-2000 километров от нашего дома. Вот, пожалуй, все, что хотел сказать по этому видео. Мне кажется, вам должно было быть это интересно. Если вам откланиваюсь, всем хорошего дня и счастливо.